Tiger. Let me have that answer down there, will you? Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful. Hi, my name is Joe. I'm a recovered alcoholic. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to see Tom again. Last time Tom and I spoke together was about 3 years ago in Rochester, Minnesota, and I had one hell of a time. And I heard Pat last night, and from listening to Pat's talk and hearing what she told me in the van about herself, I realized I could put my life in Pat's hands, and whatever she suggested to do, I would do it. She told me everything about herself within a matter of 5 minutes on how she participates in her home group and how she lives her personal life. That told me the whole story right there. This fella here, you have to watch him. He's been sober 39 years, but he's a smooth operator. He's the kind of guy that could talk about your mother, and 3 days later you'd be walking down the street and you'd go, hey, he was talking about my mother. I mean, he's got a way of sliding it in on you without you knowing it. You got to watch him. I've enjoyed all the speakers. I'm looking forward to hearing Tom tomorrow, and I enjoyed Karen, and I enjoyed the Alatines also. I got a big kick out of that. I'm here to stay sober. I'm not here because I'm somebody. I might have a suit on, and you know, some people in AA know how to talk, and I guess I'm one of those people. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. I know how to talk. I might not know much about the English language, but I know how to talk. But that doesn't mean I have a spiritual edge or one up on anybody. That just means I know how to talk, and it's my turn to talk tonight. Maybe next time I come back, it'll be your turn to talk, and I'll sit there and listen to you. And it's really about that simple. I'm here on the advice of my sponsor. I'm not here because I'm somebody. My sponsor told me when I was new, he said, if you get the opportunity to do something in AA and somebody asks you, do it because it'll help you. So really, I'm here on the advice of my sponsor. And I've been doing that ever since he suggested that to me when I started staying sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that gal back there was 6 days. I'd have never got up here with 6 days. I don't know how you did that. I wouldn't even have raised my hands. You've got more guts than I had. But I'm going to talk to you tonight. I'm going to talk to you, and if you give me 60 minutes of your time, I'd appreciate it because it'll really help me. Really, I just want to share my story with you because I get such a big benefit out of it. I was amazed for a state that has less than 1 million people. You guys are in the news a lot. A couple months ago, I'm reading about this Unabomber and the chlorine gas spill, and I'm thinking, wow, we get up there, we're either going to blow or go, one or the other. And then they have these freemen, you know, and I'm watching these guys, and I'm thinking to myself, I can identify with those guys. They're willing to lose their lives because of the principle of what they believe in. It's the principle of the thing. And I thought, well, hell, I know how to get those guys out of there. I should have called the FBI a long time ago. These guys are basing their life on the fact that they're right and everybody's wrong. So all you got to do is go up to the door with the FBI with a 12-pack. Yeah? Well, we've been talking it over. We think you might be right. Well, okay, we'll be out in a minute. They just want somebody to agree with them. That's all it is. And they're willing to base their life on it, and that's the way I was. And I just want somebody to agree with me. I was willing to die for it. I'm your average kind of guy. I'm your average Joe, I guess you could say. I'm not educated by society's standards. I have a 10th grade education. I happen to get a GED through circumstances in the Navy. A guy walked by one day and asked if I wanted to take a GED test, and I said yes. I don't make a lot of money. Not well known, not famous for anything. My wife and 2 kids and myself live in a little 3-bedroom brick ranch. And if you're new in Alcoholics Anonymous, the reason I'm sharing this with you is the heat's off. The heat's off. I've been sober since October 5th, 1978, and I'm a perfect example that you can stay sober and be happy and comfortable with yourself for over 17 years and not amount to a goddamn thing. So the heat's off. Just relax. We're just here to have fun and help one another and share our experience, strength, and hope with each other. I used to tell in my story that I've done everything except morphine. I did that back in February. That stuff is marvelous. I had back surgery, and I woke up hooked up to a morphine drip. And it was taped to my hand, and they said, if you have pain, just push that button. Man, I got to hitting on that button. And I thought to myself, man, now I know why those people did morphine. I might have a bad back, but man, I have a good attitude. Woo! But it caused me a problem. It caused me a problem. I couldn't pee. Now, you laugh. I was the one that couldn't pee. About 7 hours later, I got to go. And I couldn't go. The guy comes in my room. He says, well, let me get it over with. We'll relieve you. I said, why don't you come back in 60 minutes? I'll try real hard. And he came back in 60 minutes, and he relieved me. And he says, 8 out of 10 men have this problem when they're hooked up to that morphine. And I thought, I didn't know that was causing me a problem. And the counter on that morphine drip read 0 from that time to the following morning when I left there. I said, you give me something, I am not touching that. It was obvious to me that that was causing me a problem. I am an alcoholic. My mind will not protect me against the first drink. And once I start to drink, it won't tell me the truth about what my problem is. Now, I could see that morphine was causing me a problem. I mean, that stuff made me feel good. But even through all of that, it was obvious to me it was causing me a problem. When I was on Skid Row, there was a month that I drank, every day, and I had 2 square meals in the month of February. And I was drinking, as long as I was awake, I was drinking MD 2020. And I was getting hungry, and I found a can of alphabet soup. And I got the top off of it. And you're drunk, you're not going to spend time heating it, just eat it. So I drank this can of alphabet soup on a full stomach of MD 2020. And my stomach said, And I had alphabets coming out of my nose. It was just coming out everywhere. And you know what my mind said? That's the last time I eat alphabet soup. From here on out, it's tomato for me. So I have a mind that does not protect me against the first drink, and it doesn't protect me after I take the first drink. I've done everything you could think of. I didn't get to do crack. I got sober before that happened, but I'm sure I'd have tried that just in an effort to try to control my drinking. Drunks will do anything to try to control their drinking. They'll even take drugs. But I had an interesting experience a couple weeks ago. I was out in Laughlin, Nevada with my wife, and I thought, I'm not going to know anybody here, probably. And I'm sitting in the Riverbend Casino and Hotel overlooking the river with my wife, and this gal over here says, I think I know you. And I says, you do? She says, yeah, have you ever been to Oak Street? And that's an old AA clubhouse in Cincinnati. I said, well, yeah, that's where I got sober at years ago. She said, do you know a guy named Dave Shelton? I says, well, yeah, I used to see Dave every Monday night at an AA meeting in Lebanon, a maximum security prison about 15 miles from where I live. She said, that's my husband, and we live about 32 miles over the river. And I was supposed to talk Saturday night at the banquet, and my hair stood up on my arm, and I couldn't think straight from that time on. I mean, it just really threw me. And after the meeting that night, Keith and Sally were there, and they said, are you going to Montana? And I says, yeah. And they said, well, we have a daughter that lives in Pony, and she's going to be there. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, I mean, I've never been to Montana before. It's like God's way of saying, wherever you go, I'm going to make sure that there's a drunk in your life that's going to take care of you if you just listen and look. And that's what I've been doing since October 5th, 1978, is trying to keep my eyes and my ears open to see how this power is going to take care of me. Because I am full of self-will, and I am blind to what my problem is. I'm just thoroughly blind to it. I'll give you an example. I was sober about 3 years. I had learned to fly a plane, and I had taken my mother up flying. And we flew about 45 minutes to a little restaurant, and I was so proud of myself I couldn't see straight, And that same woman had a restraining order on me. I was not allowed within 100 feet of her house. I tore her house up, called her all kind of terrible names at 3 in the morning in her own kitchen, smashed dishes, furniture, all. She was afraid of me. We're on the way back. and she fell asleep in the plane. We're about 5,000 feet, and the lights are pretty on the city. You know what my mind thought? You ungrateful so-and-so, you. I spend all this time and money to take you out to eat, and you fall asleep. Now, a week ago, I took that same woman up to the penitentiary where my brother is, and on the way home, she fell asleep. Now, to tell you how slow I am, well, after I dropped her off, I thought about the time she fell asleep in that plane. That was 15 years ago. And it occurred to me that same guy that she was so afraid of, that she had a restraining order on, that she felt she had to kick out and get away, she was trusting her life with that same guy, and she was so comfortable with what AA had done for this alcoholic that she had fallen asleep. I'm one of those slow learners. Sometimes the full impact of what's going on in front of me takes quite some time for me to see. And that's why I always do what I'm asked to do in Alcoholics Anonymous, so I don't miss what I'm supposed to see and what I'm supposed to hear. My mother's been sober next month, 25 years. Pat forgot to stand up. 2 weeks ago, she had 25 years. My brother's been sober 11 and a half years in the Ohio State Penitentiary. And everybody's got to get it their way, and by God, he got it his way. And my dad's never has found sobriety. And the reason I share this with you, it really doesn't have much to do with my drinking. It was my drinking that got me in trouble. I never stood in front of the judge because there was a lot of drinking in my family. I stood in front of the judge because there was a lot of drinking in me. I never wet my pants or puked on myself because of my father's drinking, but I sure did because of my drinking. I thank God I finally know that I'm the problem. And for years I thought they were the problem. We grew up in a little two-bedroom house in a suburb called North College Hill in Cincinnati, Ohio. Had a good childhood. I'm really sorry. I mean, all of us were alcoholic, but we had a good time. We weren't always tearing each other's lives up. We weren't always sick to the point where nobody understood what was going on. I remember as a young boy, liked being around people, liked being in social situations. You know, I hear a lot of people say, well, I always felt like I didn't fit in, or I felt like a round peg in a square hole. I did not. I felt good. I liked being around people. I remember my grandfather, my mother's father, used to come down. He used to like to drink heavy. He was a heavy drinker. And he would come down the street with a buddy of his that was a taxi cab driver. And they'd both be drunk. And it made my father nervous because we lived on a dead-end street. Today they call them cul-de-sacs. To me, they're dead-end streets. And he'd get a possum out of the trunk on a leash and walk around the neighborhood drunk. And my father would just go bananas. He said, Jesus, Jubal, your father's out there walking a possum on the leash. Get him in the house, Jesus. And me and my brother, you know, we're 11, 12 years old. And, you know, we think that's funny. I mean, they looked like they were having a good time to me. That was not an embarrassment to me. That looked like these people were having fun. And I used to love to go see family and visit relatives. And there was a little bit of a twist on visiting relatives for me. We always had a tendency to go to places like Cell Block 6 and Building A to visit family. And that's kind of hard to put in your school paper when you go back in the fall what you did this summer. You know, it's kind of hard to put words on it. We went to the state mental institution to visit Grandma, you know. And it's interesting. Last summer, I'd take my boys up to visit their uncle and my brother in the state penitentiary, and we're still going to institutions visiting family, and they had to write their paper, and I said, I can help you on that. So, I remember as a young boy, my mother's drinking started to take off, and my mother's drinking took off a lot quicker than my father's did. At least it was more noticeable to us because she drank at home. My father had the only car, and back then it was common in the neighborhood we grew up in. Most people only had one car, and the wives stayed home with the families and stuff, and that was what was going on in the 50s and 60s. And my God, I remember she used to like to drink quarts of beer and eat those black mollies all the time. You know, they prescribed speed for women back then for everything from losing weight to toxemia to everything under the sun. And in my teenage years, I'd come home tripping on LSD, and she'd want to talk. And I'd say, not right now, Mom. I got to go to bed, you know. And We always thought she was crazy because she acted like my grandmother when she drank in a state mental institution. That's right. And Dad said she was crazy, so that meant she was crazy. I remember I was about 12 years old and my brother was 9. He told his boys out in the backyard one day, he said, you know, if it wasn't for you two boys, I'd be long gone. Your mother's crazy. Well, I didn't know back then he was wiping his hands clean of everything that's ever gone wrong in the family and put it on Mom, but to look at Mom, he was right. And, you know, a lot of times most of the time people don't know alcoholism when they see it. Thank God I found a group of people that talk my language, that know how I think and how I feel. We were out to eat last night and this gal comes up to us and she asked me, would you like a Long Island iced tea? I says, no, I've got to be home by Christmas. You know? And everybody at the table laughed and she just kind of looked at me. She didn't, I felt sorry for her, you know. So, and even back then when we saw that, we had mistaken it for mental illness. You know, and it's interesting. I heard a woman give a talk last year. It was the finest AA talk I have ever heard. This woman, when she came to AA, was a babbling idiot. She could not have any continuity to any subject that she talked about. You could say, hi, Emily, how are you? And she'd and go to 10 different subjects and may never come back to the first one. And people at that time, I knew what alcoholism was, and I saw it in my mother and my grandmother in a state mental institution, and I saw that that's how my grandfather, my dad's dad, acted when he had wet brain, just before he was completely shot. And I knew that what I was looking at was alcoholism. And she gave a talk last year, and she says, if you remember me at the AA meetings 12 years ago, and you were one of those people that saw me and said, that Emily, she has alcoholism, but she has other problems. She says, I heard you. I heard those people saying that Emily, she's alcoholic, but she has other problems. She said, if you were there and you're here tonight, that I'm here to tell you that what you saw was alcoholism. It's interesting, even in AA, we don't want to believe that what we're seeing is alcoholism. But it's this disguised, you know, and diagnosed a lot of times before people even get to AA as depression or schizophrenia or anything but alcoholism. And this woman stood up there and she had continuity from the time she started to talk until 30 minutes later when she finished. And she talked about how grateful she was for living a happy, sober life and being able to feel like a whole and useful human being once again. And that had such an impact on me because I got to watch a woman who was about that far away from being wet brain to stand there and being a happy, confident woman and being content with her life sober. It was the best talk I've ever heard in my life. I was about 13 years old. It was the 60s. I talk about drugs in my talk because there's a chapter for people like me in our book more about alcoholism. It says people like me, through every form of self-deception and experimentation, will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. Well, a drunk will do anything to keep from being an alcoholic. They'd rather be called crazy. They'd rather be called a drug addict. They'd rather be called an addict. And I didn't know I was an alcoholic back then. My God, at 12 years old, I remember joining the Boy Scouts. And by the age of 14, I was an Eagle Scout. That might not mean anything to anybody here, and it didn't really have that big of an impact on me then, but looking back on it, that's really something. I don't think most adults today could do that. But I remember at that time I was a young, confident kid. Alcoholism, I had not become what our book calls alcoholic to what we know as alcoholism. I was a potential alcoholic. And there was about 100 boys at that time in the Cincinnati area who had gotten that Eagle Scout Award. And I had God and Country Award in the church and was a member of the Order of the Arrow and all that stuff. And I really liked it. I did. I absolutely enjoyed that. And the guy who awarded us that Eagle Scout Award was General Westmoreland, Time Magazine's Man of the Year. And I remember him coming up to me after the ceremony and he looked at me and he says, I like young men like you in my army. He called it my army. And he says, if you keep getting grades like you're getting in school and do well, here's my card. I want you to call me. I like men like you to be officers in our army. The man was essentially saying, you go to West Point if you want. You get good grades, we'll make sure you do it. Every boy in the area had a sponsor, like some type of mentor at that time. Mine was President Langston, University of Cincinnati. I'm 14 years old, and he calls me in his office about a week before the ceremonies, and he says, anything that I can do to help you further your education at this college, when you get 16 or 17 years old and you keep getting the grades that I've seen you get, here's my card. You call me at home, and we'll make sure you get a college education. Now, here were two men. One was willing to offer me a college education for free, and another man was willing to help me become an officer in the military. I could tell you what I wanted to do with my life, where I was going, how I was going to do it. I had self-confidence just oozing out of me. And by the time I was 23 years old, I'm sitting in a local restaurant and I'm sober 2 months, and I had to have somebody tell me that I made enough money to buy a car. I said, really? You're not kidding me, are you? I mean, the numbers add up, don't they? This isn't a joke. I mean, you're not scamming me, are you? I didn't know whether to believe you anymore. I couldn't believe me. I didn't know what was true. I didn't know what was false. I didn't know anymore. And I went from a confident young kid to a shell of a young man in about a 10-year period. That's alcoholism to me. I started smoking marijuana when I was 13 years old. It was the 60s. It was the thing to do. Everybody was doing it. If you belonged to a cause or were in some type of movement and you had bell bottoms on and tie-dye shirts and you were against the war and you had pot, you were cool. That's the way it was where I was living. I didn't know I was alcoholic. I was just trying to be cool. At 14 years old, I had a guy offer me some LSD. He said, try this. It'll give you a better understanding of yourself and the world that you live in. Well, I thought, wow, that sounds kind of good. About 400 trips later, I didn't understand myself or the world I lived in any better than the first trip. But I remember the guy who turned me on to that stuff at 14 years old. He was in his 20s, and we would run out of that stuff. And I'd say, let's go up the street and get a couple quarts of Miller and wait for that guy to bring some more in. And he'd say, no, Joe, it doesn't do anything for me. It makes my stomach upset. It makes me feel sleepy and want to go home and call it a night. You go ahead, I'll wait for you. And I thought to myself, you're weird. You can sit here with that look on your face if you want. I'm going up and getting me a couple quarts of Miller. And I'd go up to that pony keg, and they'd give me those couple quarts of Miller. And they'd ask me, well, why are you getting this beer, Joe? I thought you were one of these dopers. And I'd probably give them the excuse, like every alcoholic needs. They need an excuse to drink. They don't know why they're drinking. Well, mine at that time would have been can't find any drugs. Like lost my job. Got a flat tire. It's raining. Girlfriend left me. Can't find any drugs. Alcohol is the solution for everything for the alcoholic, even running out of drugs. Well, I didn't know that. I had no idea. I was one of those people that come to AA and said all that stuff was the same. It's just alcohol, drugs, all that stuff's the same. Well, I'll tell you what, when I look back on my life, that's not true. I don't know about anybody here, but my idea of a good time on LSD is not a crowded shopping center at 5 in the afternoon. Too much stuff moving around at one time. My idea of a good time on that stuff is somebody's basement. One other person, you have any more than that, the conversation gets too confusing. So don't tell me it's the same, because I know it's not. My own experience tells me it's not the same. I went from Eagle Scout to hanging out at the college campus and doing what all these college people were doing. I had a spiritual thirst ever since I was a young boy. I was looking for something to make me feel like a whole and useful human being. I know that now, looking back on it. I started getting into a lot of trouble. I started running away from home at 16 years old. I would do things like hitchhike to Florida from Cincinnati with 9 cents in my pocket in February because I was having a bad day. I hitchhiked to Florida, and I got down in Naples, Florida, and ended up in a Hallelujah house. You know, I'm wondering, what the hell am I doing here? I'm beating a tambourine on a street corner thinking, Jesus, when are we going to eat? I mean, I'm doing this stuff sober, and I can't defend or explain or rationalize or justify why I'm doing what I'm doing. And, you know, that's part of the insanity of alcoholism for alcoholics is I can't tell you why I'm doing what I'm doing. I've got to have a quick mind to come up with excuses and plausible ideas to make you think I know what's going on. I remember passing out one time with my pants down around my ankles. And this girl the next day says, "How come you passed out with your pants down around your ankles?" I said, "I was hot." Now, I didn't even know my pants were down around my ankles till she said something. I didn't know. But I was like that, drunk or sober. I'd run away. Now, you're going to think about this a second. My hair was out to here. I had one of those big afros, the kind where you turn your head and the hair catches up to it. And there was a guy with me. He had hair down to his rear end, and we had hitchhiked and got thrown in jail in Cordele, Georgia. They don't like anybody in Cordele, Georgia. Not unless you're from Cordele, Georgia. And the guy that arrested us looked like that cop on the old Dodge commercial. You know, the heavy-set guy with the mirror glasses and got the cowboy hat on. He said, "What you doing down here, Yankee?" I thought, "Oh, man, we're in trouble here." Because my hair's out to here and this guy's hair down to his rear end. He got real close to me. He looked at me and said, "You white or black, boy?" I said, "Oh, man." I knew I was in trouble then because I'd seen that movie Deliverance. You know what I mean? And I could hear that banjo in the background going, da 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 da. And they threatened to tie us up and throw us in the swamp. Yeah, the deputy said, "We tie these boys up, throw them in the swamp. Nobody'd know nothing about it." And I thought about the other part of that movie where that guy said, "He sure got a pretty set of lips on him, don't he?" They scared the hell out of us. Now, how you go from Eagle Scout being scared to being thrown in a swamp, I don't know. But I didn't know what was wrong with me. I thought, well, I'm just running across people that aren't supposed to be in my life. I'm hanging around people I'm not supposed to hang around, and that wasn't true. I was hanging around people I was supposed to hang around. And I had done some things after running away from home a few times. I was getting in trouble in school. I went from straight A's in school to not even be able to finish my junior year, and looked at going to the penitentiary for a long time. And I was given a choice: you either go to jail or you go in the Navy. And I thought, well, I'll take the Navy. It didn't take me long to figure that out. And I went into the Navy, and I was going to start over. Like every alcoholic, they're going to start over new. They're going to get it right this time. And I'm in the Philippine Islands. I'm 17 years old, and I got scared. I suddenly realized that I could not hitchhike across the Pacific when I was having a bad day. I got scared, and I told this fellow, I said, "I think I made a mistake getting the Navy. I think I'm going to get out." And he says, "You can't." My mind says, "You watch me. Don't tell me what to do." And about a year and a half later, I was out. I told them I had flat feet. I used to run 10 miles a day in track, 5 in the morning, 5 in the afternoon. And they bought it. They bought it. And I'm out, and I'm going to go home and help my mother, and I don't even know I'm alcoholic. My drinking had progressed so much in my teens. Now I'm 19 years old. I'm getting out of the Navy, and I'm trying to explain and rationalize to everybody that asks me why I got out of the Navy, why I got out of the Navy. I'm justifying every move that I make because I don't understand the moves I'm making. I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't even know what my problem is. I went through good jobs. And then I got to a point where I couldn't hold jobs anymore. I became a violent drunk. At 20 years old, I come home at 3 in the morning. I'm calling my mother those names, and you drank like I did. You know what names I called my mother. You drank like I did. You know what I'm talking about. I'd put my fist through walls and tear doors off the hinges, smash lamps, break furniture. And my mother's a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous trying to stay sober with a couple jokers like me and my brother. We had become violent. And it got to a point where she said, "I can't live like this anymore. I'm no longer going to participate in your suicide. It just kills me when I see you dying, and I can't do nothing about it." And we'd say, "You're crazy. Just because you're a sober member of AA, you think that everybody that drinks has a problem. You're crazy. Dad was right. You're nuts. Get away from me. You're crazy. You're bothering me. Get the hell away from me." Wasn't she telling me the truth? Don't tell me what to do, because I won't believe you anyway. I know what's wrong with me. My problem is I need a break. You know, I look around all these other people. They seem to get the breaks. They seem to have family. They get them good jobs. They just seem to fall in. They're lucky. I don't know how they do it. I'm just one of those guys that nothing works out for. And she says, "I'm going to have to ask you and your brother to leave." And I said, "Can you give us a week to find a place?" She says, "No, tomorrow." I said, "But," she said, "Tomorrow." And I got all my belongings and I put them in 3 green hefty trash can liners, colors, whites, and miscellaneous. I threw them in the back of a Chevy pickup truck, and I headed for No Hope, Kentucky. And I got to tell you something. That was one of the greatest things that my mother had ever done for me in my life. It was not to teach me to keep my ears clean or to change my underwear or to be polite to people. She saved my life. You see, when she stopped helping me, she actually started helping me. And the second greatest thing that woman ever did for me is she never let me come back home once I got sober. It was sink or swim, Joe. Well, I didn't know that then. I thought, I'm going to burn your house down. I'm thinking, if I can't live here, you're not either, I'll burn it down. I mean, I was that crazy. I was wild. I'd lost any sense of common decency that I was taught growing up as a kid. And I headed for No Hope, Kentucky in Covington on Skid Row on 15th and Scott. And I had a little sleeping room there, and I talk about it because it's part of my story. Hell, my story hasn't changed that much. I've been telling it ever since I've been sober. It's been keeping me sober, so I'm going to keep telling it. This room was green. It was all green. The floor's green. The ceiling and walls are green. I had holes in the walls, cobwebs in the holes. I had plastic curtains with grease on the blinds. I had a 4-pane window, and one of the panes were broken out. I had a light that hung by a wire from the ceiling. I had a mattress on the floor for a bed with no covers on it and a cardboard box turned upside down for an end table. And you know what I thought? God, this is great, isn't it? Nobody to bitch about my drinking. I could just drink as much as I want and not have to listen to all that crazy stuff, all that yelling and screaming and carrying on. And this is fantastic. And they had linoleum on the floor, and it was all curled up all the way around the edge of the room. And I'd come in at night and I'd hit that light and there were roaches all over the place. I mean, they were like a square foot apart. And light makes those animals move quick. It was like they were talking to each other. Get out of his way! Puked on me last night. And they're moving. I mean, they're going fast. And I'm looking around. I can't figure out what they're doing there. I've never had any food in there. You know, our book talks about delusion. A delusion is a life based on false beliefs that cannot be shaken by the truth or facts. I actually believe that the way I was living was good. That's delusion. Now, when I would pass out and maybe wet myself on that mattress and my mouth would be open like that and one of those roaches would kind of crawl in and you roll over, that's acceptance. And that's alcoholism. Alcoholism says you're going to give up everything that means anything near and dear to you in your life, and we're going to lower your standard of living temporarily, and then we'll get a little lower, but we want you to adjust to this for right now. And I was adjusting rapidly. And I would come in drunk, and I'd lay down on that mattress, and I'd listen to the wind tatter that plastic curtain back and forth in the breeze. And I'd look up at that wire that had that bulb hanging from it, and I'd think, if I could just get that one break, if I could just get a good job, if I could just get the right woman in my life. And I would go on and on and on. It never occurred to me it was my drinking. It was the soup. It was that Campbell soup. And we laugh about it now, but I would have bet my life on it back then. I had lost the ability to work. I was 20 when my mother kicked me out and I got on Skid Row. I turned 21. It was the 24th of December, the month after she kicked me out. And I woke up on the 26th, and I was walking down the street, and this little boy about 8 or 9 comes up, and I said, "Merry Christmas, kid." And he looked at me and he said, that was yesterday, mister. And I thought, that kid's messing with me. And I walked by a newsstand and it said, December 26th, 1976. And I mentally dismissed it like, oh well, I'll see it next year. I never understood the full impact of what was happening to me. It was cold, January 18th, 1977. I'm out of work. I haven't eaten in a while, but I knew where I could go hustle a drink. And I hitchhiked back up to the community I grew up in as a kid, over the river. And the bar's closed, and I'm drunk. And this is probably nothing for people in Montana, but in Cincinnati it was really a once-in-a-lifetime thing. It was 25 below, and the wind chill factor was 70 below, and the door shut. and nobody wanted to be around me because I'd become a violent alcoholic. I could be sitting there talking with you about current events and stick my thumb in your eye to watch the other one tear up and wonder, what the hell's wrong with you? And watch people scatter and wonder why they're scattering. Just tragic and insane behavior. And the door's shut and the wind's blowing. I have no hat, no gloves, Old Navy pea coat on, a shirt, bib overall, socks, and shoes. And I walked a couple miles, and I'm glad I was drunk. I don't think I could have stood that sober. 70 below wind chill. And I had somebody pick me up and given me a ride to downtown Cincinnati and drop me off the Dixie Terminal building. And I looked up the clock, and I think it was like 3:45 in the morning. And I walked over the bridge, and the river was frozen that year. People were driving their cars across it. And if you'd have stopped me in the middle of that bridge that night and said, "Hey, Joe, you think you might have a problem with your drinking?" I'd have probably said, "Well, hell no, I don't have a problem with my drinking. I've got a transportation problem. I have 30 cents, but the buses aren't running." Well, what do you mean, problem with my drinking? And who the hell are you anyway? What did I ever do to you for you to question me about my drinking? Well, while you're out here, while we're at it, let me tell you what my problem is. It's damn sure not my drinking. It's that mother that kicked me out. That's my problem. You know, if she wouldn't have got sober in AA and my parents wouldn't have got divorced, I'd be a college graduate by now. That's my problem. It's the girlfriend that dumped me. It's the truck that got towed away. It's the Navy. It's society. That's my problem. I'd have bet my life on it. It surely wasn't the alcohol. My God, it was the thing that allowed me to dance at those freshman dances in high school. I knew what to say to those girls. Would you like to dance? I couldn't do it. I was afraid. I have a couple drinks. Shoot, I dance with the guys. I didn't care no more. So anything that frees you up and makes you feel that good surely can't be the problem. And you know what? Till the day I stopped drinking and got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, I still looked at alcohol as the solution. I'm an alcoholic. Alcohol is the solution for me. Whether it stopped working for me or not, it was the solution for me. It was getting warm out in March of 77, and it was really warm for March of 77. It was like in the 60s, and I'm sitting out in front of my room on Scott Street on Skid Row, and I've got bib overalls on with a little dried puke on my overalls, and didn't have a shirt on, no underwear, no socks. I've got hair out to here. I smell like a goat. I look like Charlie Manson, and I'm seeing these couples go up and down the street on a Friday night, and I'm thinking, wonder why I can't get a date, you know? And I'm thinking that's what's wrong with me. And the next day, I wake up, and I'm standing with my face pressed up against a chain-link fence of a parochial schoolyard about 9 or 10 blocks up the street. And I just drank a bottle of MD 2020, and I'd wet myself. And I'm standing with my face pressed up against this chain-link fence watching 8 and 9-year-olds play at recess. And I'm thinking to myself out of self-pity, I wish I could be 8 or 9 again. I wish I could go home to my mother and say, God, Mom, I didn't mean to turn out to be like this. Give me another chance. I'll do better this time. Just one more chance. Well, I knew I wasn't going to be 8 or 9. I knew I wasn't going home to Mom. I was going to go back up the street, get a little change up, maybe a little Wild Irish Rose. I was getting tired of MD. And that was daily existence for me. I became one of those people who became convinced that life was never going to get better for them, and I was hopeless. That hopelessness hurt me more than the booze ever did, because that hopelessness was there every time I got sober. And we wonder what we should write down when we get sober on our inventory. That's interesting. I had had a spiritual awakening on April the 9th, 1977, and I'm not really going to go into it because it would take up too much time. There's other things I want to talk about. But this spiritual awakening woke me up to the fact that maybe I don't have to drink. Just maybe. And I called my mother at the AA clubhouse, the person who kicked me out, the person I hated second to myself. And I said, Mom, this is Joe. And she says, what do you want? And I said, how do you stay sober? And I could hear her crying in the background. She said, oh, my God, he's one of us. Mom, let me run this by you one more time. This is my last time. I'm out here on the street. How do you stay sober? And she put me on the phone with a guy who said, "Do you think you might have a problem with your drinking?" I says, "Well, I don't know. I'm not sure. But something inside of me says I don't have to." And he said, "Why don't you come on down to the meeting tonight?" And I says, "I tell you what, pal, I feel like I've been on a merry-go-round going 90 miles an hour for the last 10 years of my life. I want to go back home, go to the community bathtub up on the second floor that everybody uses. And I'm going to go to bed, and I'll be down the next day." And by God, that's what I did on April the 10th, 1977. I'm 22 years old. My hair's out to here. No underwear, no socks, no shirt, bib overalls on, and an old pair of worn-out earth shoes. And I knew when I walked in that place that somebody was going to say, "Why don't you get a haircut? Where's your clothes at? Why don't you get a job? Man, why don't you take a bath? That last one's null and void. You stink." I knew they were going to say that to me because that's what I said to myself in that mirror over the sink every day. I'd look at myself in that mirror and say, "What's wrong with you? Look at you. You're a damn mess. Look at your hair, man. It's out to here. Where's your clothes? Son, get it together. Get yourself a job. What's wrong with you?" I had already told myself that day in and day out looking in that mirror, and I just expected that's what they would say to me. And I walk in, and there's a group of people over here at a table, and there's a guy in his 50s. He was an engineer, and he walks up to me and he says, "It's good to see you, Joe. We've been waiting for you. Would you like a cup of coffee? Why don't you come on over here and sit with us? We'd be glad to have you." And he said, "We don't know if you're an alcoholic like we are, but if you are, you're in the grips of a progressive, fatal, and incurable illness. Never gets any better without spiritual relief." Now, I'm shaking my head like this, but on the inside I'm thinking, that might be true for you, you old fart. You drank 30 years. Look at you. Your problem is you're burnt out, you cannot successfully drink, and you have nowhere left to go. That's what I'm thinking. I didn't say that to the guy. And there's a housewife over here. She's in her 40s, and she's saying, "If you are an alcoholic like we are, we can show you how we found a way up and out of our problems." She didn't say, "We'll tell you what to do." Wayne. I don't do this intentionally, and most alcoholics I meet do not do this intentionally. This is not a conscious thing that alcoholics do. But I'm the kind of person you start telling, I see you, but I don't hear you anymore. I don't do it consciously. It's the way I'm built. I'm spiritually dyslexic. I got everything backwards. I think people trying to help me are trying to hurt me. But if you stand there and you talk to me about your experience and what's happened to you and how you found a way up and out of your problems, I go, "Oh, really? Tell me more. That's fascinating." And there was a guy that got up to give us a talk like I'm giving tonight, and he had just gotten a sponsor, and it was a big deal. And it was a big deal because he had never had one, and he wanted to let everybody know he had one. And I didn't know what one was. This is my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm looking around, and the average age at that time was between 40 and 50 years old. These people were old, man. I mean, I'm 22. When you're 40 or 50, that's old. I'm 41 now. 50 seems rather mild, you know. But at that time, I didn't know what a sponsor was, but I looked around and I thought, well, they're all old. They all must be sober, and they all must have a sponsor. I don't want to be left out. I want one, whatever the hell they are. I'm going to get me one. And I turned to the guy next to me after the meeting. I said, "Would you be my sponsor?" And he says, "Yeah." And he's been my sponsor ever since. And I hear people go to discussion meetings on how to pick a sponsor. And then they ask me, and I'll say, don't make a big deal out of it. My experience tells me that if you just turn around and ask somebody, they'll say, "Yeah." And just ask somebody. And they'll go, "Boy, he's narrow-minded, isn't he?" And I didn't know what a sponsor was, but he says, he told me some things that he did to stay sober. He said, "I have a home group I go to every week. I have an institution meeting I go to at least once a week, a jail, a hospital, detox, penitentiary. I talk to my sponsor on a regular basis. I go to a meeting as often as I can." And he said, "Joe, the most important thing is I've read this book and I try to follow the directions in it the best I can." And I'm living on Skid Row, and this guy hands me this book. And I opened this book, and I thumbed through it, and I thought, there's not one goddamn picture in this book. There's not many people on Skid Row reading books, let alone ones without pictures. You think they at least have a picture of the co-founder passed out in the bathtub or something, you know what I mean? Like one of those diet ads in the paper. "Here's Bill drunk, here's Bill sober, check that out. I got to get some of that." But it wasn't like that. And I thought this guy was dumb anyway, because I thought anybody that was sober and happy was a little goofy. How can you be happy and be sober? I thought either you're a religious fanatic or you're just not in touch with reality, but you can't be that happy. You must be stupid. But I heard a guy over here say all you have to do is just don't drink a day at a time, go to meetings, and you'll be okay. I thought, I'll do that, but I'm not reading that book. And I read everything but that book. I'm on Skid Row reading psycho-cybernetics and pyramid power and power of positive thinking. That's hard to do on Skid Row, I'll tell you that. You're flicking the roaches off your mattress trying to think positive, and it just doesn't work. And after about 89 days of going to meetings every night, I went to my sponsor. I said, what do you think about a little marijuana? He said, well, you haven't had a problem with it? I said, yes, you smoke it. Whoa, good sponsor here. I like this guy. He knew I'd had it all my mind made up. I was going to anyway. The handwriting was on the wall, and there wasn't no sense to stop me because he couldn't stop me. I was going to. It was on my mind. You know how we are. If it's on our mind, we got to do it to check it out to kill the curiosity. Ain't nobody going to stop us. We got to do it. And I don't know what made me think I could smoke marijuana and quench my thirst with a Diet Pepsi. I've never done it before. It was always Miller, MD 2020, Windsor, something to really give it depth and texture and vomit. And I came back to AA, and I felt like I'd let my sponsor down. I felt like I'd let AA down, and I came back. I stayed sober 4 months the next time, meeting every day, drank again. Stayed sober 5 months the next time, meeting every night. 5th month, chaired the meeting for that month. And the last day of the month, which is the last meeting I chaired, I walked out of the meeting, and I'm walking down the street, and my head says, you know, a bottle of MD 2020 would be really good right now. And my head said, you're a big boy, go get it. And I went and got it. And I'm drinking this bottle of wine down, and I'm thinking to myself, you are really crazy. You have just been to 5 months of meetings every day, and you just chaired a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you're drinking a bottle of Mad Dog 2020. AA does not work for people like you. And I went in and out of AA. I went through a hospital for alcoholism. That's before the advent of the care unit. I almost got into Scientology out of desperation. I did that for a couple of days, and I had to get drunk. I couldn't show up again, so alcohol saved me from getting involved in that. Really, alcohol saved me. And I went in and out of AA never knowing when I was going to be drunk and never knowing when I was going to be sober, not knowing what was wrong with me. I really didn't know what was wrong with me. You know, I hear people say, oh, he's in denial. Well, you've got to know what your problem is in order to deny it. And I didn't know what my problem was. I was still living out there thinking it was my lack of education, a lack of money, a lack of woman in my life, a lack of a car that ran. I really believed that. I didn't even really know what was wrong with me. And I came back to AA on October the 5th, 1978, and that's my sobriety date, and I didn't plan on getting sober. I didn't sit down one day and said, you know, I've had enough. I think I'm going to grow spiritually now. I came back to AA because there was an eating meeting, and I was hungry, and I was out of work, and it was getting cold out again in Cincinnati in October. And I thought, well, I'm going to show up to this eating meeting and act like a good sober member of AA for 60 minutes and get a free meal. I'm going to get the hell out of here because these people are weird. And I don't remember anything that was said at that meeting that night. I was in the worst shape I'd ever been in my life. I hadn't eaten in days. I hadn't bathed in days. I had no job, no money, no car. And I'm sitting in my sponsor's car after the meeting. And I remember what was said in his car after the meeting. This guy had watched me go in and out of AA, in and out, in and out, in and out. And he said, Joe, I want to thank you. You helped save my life this past year. And I'm thinking, you bastard. I'm thinking this. I didn't say it to him. I'm thinking, you have the audacity to say I saved your life. Look at me. I don't have anything. And you're saying, don't talk down to me. That's what I thought. But what I said was, oh, really, Mike? How's that? And he said, my mother died of leukemia this past year. And he said, I had made a deal with God. You saved my life, and I won't drink. And she died. And I could taste whiskey going down. But every time I was ready to drink, Joe, you went out and drank. And I saw what it was doing to you in your life at that time, and I figured I didn't need that in my life right now. Thanks. You teach me a lot. And out of a fit of humility and love and understanding from my fellow man, I said, you son of a bitch, I'm not teaching you anymore. And I didn't come back to AA to stay sober. I thought this guy was hustling me. He's using me. He said I helped save his life. Look at me. I don't even have underwear. I don't even have a shirt. And I'm his lifesaver? And I walked away from his car thinking, I'm going to prove to you AA doesn't work for people like me. It hasn't worked the last 30 times I've been in AA, and I'm so sure it won't work. I'm going to read that book that doesn't have a picture in it, and I'm going to try to follow the directions the best I know how. I'm going to go to the same meetings you go to. I'm going to smoke the same cigarettes you smoke. I'm going to tell the same stupid jokes you tell over and over and over. And when it doesn't work out, I can turn around and say, told you so, you were wrong. And I've been sober ever since then, October 5th, 1978. Can I get some water? Little did I know that I had made a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of Mike Dries, my sponsor. I didn't know that. I didn't even know I had surrendered. I'm sober 3 days, and my sponsor calls me in that building I was living in Covington. And everybody in the building's over 65 but me. I'm your token hippie, but we're all alcoholics. We're all using the same toilet. We're all using the same bathtub. The fixtures are falling out of the place. She's the only one that has a phone. And she yells down the hall, Joe, there's this guy from Alcoholics Anonymous on the phone. He wants to talk to you. I go, oh, Christ, they all know I'm an alcoholic now. And everybody there is alcoholic. And I get on the phone. He says, I need somebody to talk down at jail tonight for me. He says, you don't have to if you don't want to. I can get somebody else. I said, man, I've been sober 3 days. What the hell am I going to tell these guys? He said, tell them what it's like to be sober 3 days. Well, all right. And I hung up and I went, oh, that was dumb. That was dumb. No. What did you do that for? I've got $1.25 on me and I used 30 cents to take the bus and I'm riding the bus to meet a guy who I think's hustling me, to talk to a group of people I don't know, to tell them what it's like to be sober 3 days. I'm thinking, you've lost your better judgment. Now, looking back on it now, I know exactly what it was. That alcoholic said, I surrender. I will do whatever is asked of me to do in Alcoholics Anonymous, whatever it takes to stay sober. And I went in there, I talked 5 minutes, we left, and we walked out, and my sponsor said, see, that helped you stay sober, didn't it? And I thought, you are dumber than I thought. I didn't see any beer in there at all. And what he was saying was going right over my head. A week later, he said, I need somebody to go up with me and tell their story at the men's halfway house. You don't have to if you don't want to. I can get somebody else. It's no big deal. If you're going to do it for yourself. Don't do it for me or them. Well, all right. I started going to meetings, and I started doing this thing in AA, and I started reading this book. And the gal was sober 6 days. I want to share something with you. It's been my experience that you don't have to understand this thing in order to enjoy it. I was reading this book. I was sober a couple of weeks, and a man walked up to me at the AA clubhouse and offered me a job. And I said yes. And it just so happened that guy was sober 19 years. I thought he was God. When you're sober 2 weeks, 19 years is God. And I started to read this big book, and I was at the point in the 5th chapter where it talks about the third step. And it says, having a new employer, being all-knowing and all-powerful, he provided us with what we need as long as we kept close to him and performed his work well. I said, that is an amazing book. How did they know I was going to have a new employer? That is really something. And I didn't understand it, but it didn't stop me. I had a sponsor who knew how sick I was. I'd say, Mike, what's this spirituality stuff these people talk about all the time? He said it's just a way of life that will allow you to be in good spirits sober so you don't have to drink. That's all. Well, okay. I could buy that. Just think he would have said, you have to find God now. I'd have walked away and he'd have seen the back of my head, and that's the last thing he would have seen. But he put it in such a way where a sick drunk like me could grab onto it. I got to 30 days sober. I was ready to drink again, and I knew what that felt like. I'd done it too many times. But I was on this quest to try to get back at him and prove that he was wrong. And I said, what'd you do when you got like this? He said, I did what that book said. I wrote that stuff down that was bothering me. And he knew I was too sick to put a label on my emotions. I didn't even know what resentment was till I came to AA. I knew I was mad about my life not turning out the way I thought it should have, but I didn't know there was a word for it. And he'd say, you know, you write your resentments down. Joe, those are the things that make you mad when you think about them. That's your resentment. It's in the things that make you kind of uncomfortable and squirm when you think about it. We call that fear. And he said the things in your sex life that you said you were never going to tell anybody, you write that stuff down. And I went back to that sleeping room and I wrote that stuff down. And I got to that sex part. I thought, this guy, he needs me to stay sober like he says he does. Listen to this. Wait till I tell him about that buffalo from Billings, Montana. He'll get a kick out of that. Yeah. And I went and read that stuff to him, and I got to the buffalo, and he busted out laughing. He said, everybody in AA's got a buffalo. Some's bigger, some smaller. Some are willing to admit it, some aren't, but everybody's got one. My only problem with the buffalo was I lied to get it. I love you. That was my favorite lie. And I went and read this stuff to him. And I was not capable of seeing where I was at fault. What I'm sharing with you is my misunderstanding of the book at that time. My life is based on what's in this book. Believe me, I know what's in this book. But at that time, I didn't understand it. My sponsor said, can you see where you're at fault in any of this? I said, well, no, why? What do you mean where I'm at fault? And he just laughed. And he started talking about the things in his life where he had found out where he was at fault. And I thought, wow, I never looked at it like that. I said, you think that might be where I'm at fault? He says, I don't know. What do you think? It's your inventory. By that man bringing his defects of character and sharing them with me, it allowed me to see mine. You know, I'm glad our book is worded the way it is. It's all based in progress, all of it. There's no way you can do it perfectly. I get a big kick out of it. Don't get me wrong. I've been on this kick lately, and I'll get out of it, but my life is based on what this is in this book, and there's something special about one alcoholic sharing it with another. Anything that gets you drunk into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous has got to be good. But lately, with these seminars and studies and all this stuff, I get the feeling that it leaves the new person with the idea that they have to understand it before they can do it. And my experience says that's not true. That's not true at all. It's like giving a little knothole baseball player who's never stepped up to the plate a book on physics and saying, now I want you to understand the true meaning of velocity before you step into the batter's box. You think you can do that? A little kid just look at you like, what's velocity? But the AA that I know of, the big book that came to me, was in the form of another member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And my sponsor came to me and he says, look, kid, this is how I do it. I step into the box, I keep my eye on the ball, and I try to make contact with the ball and the bat. Watch. I do it about 3 out of 4 times out of 10, but watch, this is how I do it. And he'd swing and he'd show me how to do it. And he'd back up and said, you want to try it? Well, just don't look too tough. I'll try it. Might not ever understand velocity or physics, but by God, don't ever let it, understanding the big book, stop you from getting in the batter's box of life, because understanding comes later. Action is right now, and that's what this whole thing's all about, is a willingness to take action regardless of understanding. I went home after I read that stuff to him, and I reflected for an hour like the book talked about, back on my room on Skid Row, and my reflection at that time was, how could you have made a complete fool out of yourself? You just told on yourself. You told him about the buffalo from Billings. You told him about all that stuff. That was dumb. Why did you do that? That was my first reflection on a 6th step. And then I read it. I read the prayer in the book, and it was just words. It didn't mean a damn thing to me. Well, it says here I'm supposed to talk to some kind of God and do with me what you want. You know, I think it's all a joke. That's the way I looked at it. And I went and started making amends to these people that were on this list. The book said it was there when I took inventory. And I was relieved because I was tired of writing. And I started making amends, and my life started to change. I would stop mentally assassinating people at AA meetings. I'd come in there with just bib overalls on, and I'd see a guy sharp with a suit on and a nice car, and I'd think, you can't understand me. You were born with a silver spoon up your you-know-what. And it seemed like after I went through the steps the first time, I didn't see that. What I saw was another member of AA, and it was Hey, how you doing, man? It's good to see you. How have you been? Something changed me, regardless of my understanding of what happened. And that's the beautiful thing about AA for this alcoholic. It doesn't require my approval or acceptance to do what it's designed to do. I started doing AA, and my sponsor taught me how to work with drunks. He could walk up to somebody and start a conversation he's never met before. I went, wow, how do you do that? And little by little, I followed the example. Like Pat said, she saw the example. She saw how that guy worked with other alcoholics. I would see how he would talk to them and talk with them. And then I go back and read this book. I said, he's not that smart. This is where he's getting that stuff. He's stealing this stuff out of this book because he did exactly what this book was talking about. But I saw it in him before I understood what I read. I was sober about 2 years. I got married. I couldn't believe that. Shoot. Living on Skid Row, I was going to start my own group called Sex Without Partners. It was pretty bad, you know what I mean? You guys know what I'm talking about. This is Alcoholics Anonymous. You're not kidding me. You're not kidding me at all. And I got married. This woman actually wanted to be my wife, and I really wanted to be her husband. Sober about 3 years, I learned how to fly a plane. I flew over that roach-infested sleeping room that I had on Scott Street. So about 5 years, my wife had a baby. I used to say, we had a baby. Well, let me tell you, I saw it. She had the baby. I'm there, and I looked at that, and I went, oh, my God. Things will never be the same. Look at that. Oh, wow. That's... You know me, always thinking of others, you know. We were so happy with what A had done for my sponsor, an ex-bedwetter, we named our first boy after him. We called him Mike. And a year later, on the same day, she did it again. On the same day. I thought, I don't know if that's good timing or bad memory, but you better knock it off. I don't know what you're doing. And we were so happy with what A had done for my sponsor, a graduate of the local psych ward. We named our second boy after him, Bob. This little boy was different. He had his feet on upside down. I was about 4 feet away, and they pulled him out, and his little feet were in like this and completely upside down like that. The doctor said, oh, he's just fine. I thought, I'm not dumb, Doc. I can see the kid looks like Flipper. I mean, I wasn't born yesterday. I mean, I didn't know what to think. I thought, well, we don't straighten this out. I guess I'll use him for a pitching wedge or something. I don't know. I mean, what do you do? What do you say when you have something like that happen? Oh, gee, I'm overjoyed. We're going to have fun finding shoes. You know, you don't know what to think. You don't know what to say. And I knew there was a God, but I didn't know there was a God like I knew there was a God that day. Because on that day, within 4 hours of that boy being born, I was sitting in a courtroom. And my mother's sitting here, and my father's over there, and they bring this alcoholic in with shackles on his ankles and handcuffs to a waist belt. He had been to AA before, didn't think he needed it, thought he was a drug addict. Now he's looking at 5 life sentences in the Ohio State Penitentiary for drinking whiskey. That alcoholic was my brother. He ended up getting 3 10 to 25s, but at that time he's looking at 5 life. And I looked at him and I looked at me and I thought, what's the difference? And it hit me. I've got AA and he doesn't. And I walked out of there. I've never been the same since. I had a sense, a feeling on the inside of freedom that I never knew, and I knew that there was a God who put an alcoholic in my life to keep my mind off of me and my problems and my kid with his feet on upside down. And I went up to see my wife. I said, don't you worry about that little boy and his feet. He's going to be fine. She says, how do you know? I said, because that boy's daddy has Alcoholics Anonymous, and he hasn't done something so terrible in a drunken stupor that he has to be removed from society. I don't give a damn if he walks. I'm going to be able to push that boy in a wheelchair and give him a peck on the cheek and say, I love you, boy. And I just watched an alcoholic today lose the right to ever be a father to the family that he had, to be a husband, to watch his daughter walk down the aisle, to watch his boy play a not-hole baseball game. It was just whipped right out of his life because of alcoholism. It doesn't matter if he walks. And that little boy had operations on his feet, a lot of operations on his feet, and he walks on the bottoms now. And he's a smart little kid, just a sensitive, bright little kid. What God didn't give him in feet, man, he gave him in brains. He's a smart kid. He'll never have to use his feet if he don't want. That's true. That's really true. About last year at this time, our youngest boy that had the feet problem, he came home and he was all upset. We thought he had arthritis in his ankles, that he might have to have his ankles fused for support. And he came in, his mother went outside, and I said, "What's wrong, son?" He said, "They think they might have to fuse my ankles together, Dad, because of arthritis." And I said, "Well, what do you think about that?" He said, "That doesn't bother me as much as seeing those not-hole baseball signs down by the playground. It says, 'Sign up for not-hole baseball now.'" He said, "Dad, I just want to play like the other kids. I want to get out there and play ball with my friends. I want to be able to run and do what these other kids do. And I can't." And I said, "Bob, did you ever think you're going to be one of those people that just don't play sports?" He said, "No." I said, "How often do you see me play sports?" He said, "Well, I don't." And I said, "Well, do I seem to be a happy man to you most of the time when I'm not being an asshole?" Yeah. And I said, "So playing sports is not a prerequisite for being happy then, is it?" He said, "Well, no, I guess not." And I says, "Look, I owe this to you, son. I don't expect you to understand it, but I owe this to you as your father. Your feet are going to be one of the greatest things that ever happened to you in your life. They're going to force you to go in a direction you never would have gone if you'd had normal feet. What are you doing while your brother's out there beating the ball on the ball field?" He says, "I'm reading books, Dad." I said, "That's right. Those books are going to carry you one hell of a lot farther than that ball is going to carry your brother." I said, "But you have a responsibility to yourself." He said, "What's that?" I said, "It's up to you to find out what's positive about having bad feet. Whatever you find, whatever direction you want to go in life, you come ask me or your mother, and we will support you in that direction. But it is your responsibility to find out what's positive about having bad feet." I said, "You think you can do that?" He said, "Well, yeah, but I never thought of it like that." And he walked out, and I thought, where did a wino learn to talk to a 10-year-old like that? Huh? And I thought, wow, that's how my sponsor talks to me. And that's how I talk to people that call me their sponsor. And the only thing that bothered me about that conversation was that with that little boy is that bastard never asked me to be his sponsor. I thought, well, I guess he doesn't know good sobriety when he sees it, huh, Tom? I'm going to end my talk here with a little story. There was a sharecropping family down in Georgia. Poor people. Every year they just broke even just to survive. And one year they had a little extra money. And they all got together and said, what can we get that all of us can use? And they came to the conclusion that they wanted a mirror. They had never had a mirror before. So they got the Sears catalog out and they ordered the mirror, and they got it in the mail, and Ma opened it up and looked at herself and kind of primped her hair one way or the other and was looking at some things on her face and give it to Paul, and Paul's kind of looking at himself because he had never seen himself in a mirror. And gave it to the little girl. She was about 10, 11 years old, and she just kind of giggled. And he handed it to Johnny. Johnny's about 9 years old, and Johnny had been kicked in the face by a mule when he was about 5, and his face was badly deformed. And he looked at himself, and he looked again, and a tear came down his eye, and he looked at his father, and he said, Daddy, have you always known that I've looked like this? And he said, well, yeah, son, why? And he said, but you love me anyway. How come? He said, I love you because you're mine, boy. Because you're mine. And I have to believe that this God of my understanding loves us not because of what we do well, but because of what we don't do well. That He doesn't love us because of who we are, that He loves us because of who He is. I don't know about anybody here, but that new gal with 6 days of sobriety, we don't care where you come from. We don't care what you've done and who you've done it with. That's none of our concern. But I want you to know this, and if you don't remember anything I've said in the last 60 minutes, please remember this, please, that a drunk from Cincinnati said that you were wanted, needed, loved, and respected in Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't care where you've come from, who you've done it with, how you got here. That if you want sobriety more than anything in the whole world, by God, you've always got a seat with us. They let me in. They'll let anybody in. Thank you very much.